Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it has been a hot minute, but we are going back to our So You Want to Be a GM series on campaign health and longevity. Recently, the Legion of Myth, the last couple live streams they did a live stream where they discussed the value of sandbox games, whether or not they were really viable, what you might need to do to make them successful. And then the last stream they had was one where they were looking at comments from their different videos, and the overwhelming majority of the comments on that were from the Sandbox game live stream. And that got me to thinking about misconceptions that I feel people have about what a sandbox game actually is and how you might manage to make a sandbox as something that can be sustained for a long-term campaign. But before we get started, please open up that description box down below and make sure to follow me on minds.com. That is the best place to follow me outside of YouTube, as that is the place where I now back up all of my content. Every one of my videos, from my So You Want to Be a GM series all the way to the Zero G podcast, is now being uploaded to Minds, as well as having posts linking back to the YouTube page made there for your convenience. It is the best place to follow me in terms of, I guess we should say new tech at this point, because it's no longer just an alternative to the mainstream platforms. These new tech platforms are very much looking like they are going to be viable replacements, who knows, in the next 5 to 10 years, for the big tech platforms that keep continuing to make the same kind of mistakes that, ruined previous tech platforms in the early 2000s. But with that now out of the way, sandbox games. There is a misconception that I see quite a bit when it comes to what a sandbox game entails. A lot of people believe that a sandbox game is a truly free and open world game. Now, any GMs with experience, and even players with experience trying to play that type of sandbox game, or even not playing that type of a sandbox game, but trying to run a more proper sandbox game, at least what in my opinion is more proper, will tell you that dream of running the open world game where it's populated with all kinds of neat little nuggets and the players explore at their leisure, and then you just bring up the thing that you made and this and that and the other, that is a pipe dream. It is untenable. It cannot work, because you as the GM, you are one person, and running each of the individual elements that would be needed to properly populate a fully open world like that, actually coming up with each of those elements and not making them all feel very samey, it's beyond what one person can do. It is far beyond what one person can do. Sandbox games are not games with no borders. Sandbox games are not games with no restrictions. A sandbox game gets its name from the playground play area of the same name, a sandbox. A sandbox does not stretch on infinitely. Sandboxes have walls to keep the sand in there. They have toys to make that sand more fun. There are things within the walls that you can play with to make that flat sand, or that wavy little lumpy block of sand, more interesting and more engaging. And that's what you need to keep in mind. If you want to run a sandbox style game, you need to set the limits for where the sandbox ends. A sandbox cannot travel on forever. What I think of when people describe the sort of fully open world that they're trying to populate, that they want the players to freely explore and just go here and go there, and we're going to do this and that, and trying to pull things out of your ass, yank rabbits out of your hat that aren't there kind of thing. What I think of when I hear a lot of people talking about that pipe dream of what a sandbox game is a desert. Vast, flat, harsh, difficult to navigate, and full of mirages, illusions that, oh yeah, there's got to be so much stuff hidden in there. But that illusion will quickly break. Because, no, there isn't that much hidden in there. There really isn't. A limitless game is untenable. It can't be done. It is simply beyond the scope of even the most experienced GMs to run a game that is a fully open world, like some people tend to think of when they think sandbox games. That's why I refer to that as a desert. Deserts are wide, open expanses. At least what we typically think of is like, a low desert. Something like the Sahara or Death Valley or... I had one in mind and it just escaped me. The Mojave, for example. Lots of expanses of, mostly flat, empty land, a few hills here and there, rough plants. There's stuff there. There's stuff to find. But it quickly becomes clear just how samey it all feels. And that experience is very true of fully open world games, as I have learned myself from having played in a few in the past. Now, in total, I believe I played 3 fully open world style games. None of them succeeded. None of them. And I never went back to try any of them since then. Now, all of these were in my early days too, and I've never attempted to run a fully open world game either, because I learned from having played in these just how not feasible that is. Sandbox games are feasible, but again, with limitations, and we'll kind of get into how you might determine some of these limitations in a little bit. Now, the first of these games I played lasted for a grand total of 7 sessions before the campaign fell apart. The second and third only lasted for 3. And every single one of them fell apart for the same reasons. The GM burnt out and they couldn't keep up. They couldn't keep up with properly populating these vast expanses that they set out for us. Things began to feel very samey for us players. We started getting bored. A couple of the players stopped showing up. The GM's enthusiasm died very, very quickly. And there you go. Games were dead. Between 3 and 7 weeks, these games were dead. And I have heard these sort of stories happen over and over and over, and it has given sandbox games a bad name. But in my opinion, those aren't sandbox games. Not really, because they don't have limits. And what did I say at the start? A sandbox game has limits. Sandboxes have walls. Your sandbox game has to have walls too. So, how do you determine where the walls in your sandbox game are? Well, that depends on the scope of your sandbox game. And you need to understand that scope very well. Not only that, you need to understand the scope of your own limitations. A sandbox game can be anything as small as a dungeon that the players can freely explore however they want, all the way up to exploring an entire country using a hex grid style of exploration. Both of those can fall into the realm of a sandbox. It's more likely that the dungeon would end up being an adventure, possibly if it's a mega dungeon, multiple adventures, whereas exploring, this entire nation and doing all of that, that's going to be more likely to be a longer running campaign. But the sandbox aspect comes from essentially what you do, how you make the sandbox work. is you set up your limited area. This is the area the players are going to play in for this particular sandbox. Let's go with the example of a town and the surrounding of, let's say we'll go with the example of a forest with 3 towns. There's one town in the forest, one town to the south, and one town to the northeast. Your players start in the town to the south, let's say. Now, in the forest, you can have a lot of little encounters planned out and set up. You've got your little random encounter table to go for creatures that would be appropriate to the forest. And that's the thing. Everything you're setting up, you want to be very appropriate for the sandbox you've put together. You don't want to throw things in there that are going to kind of break the mold too much. And if you are, you need to have something in the sandbox, in my opinion, that's going to make that reasonable. For example, if you're exploring this forest, and yes, I believe it was Heathen Dog, I'm stealing this example from you. If you're going to be exploring this area and your characters run into an air elemental out of nowhere, there's been no signs that this would happen before. There's been no indication of why an air elemental, an extra-dimensional creature, would just suddenly show up in this forest. But then it turns out as they're exploring, oh crap, there's an old wizard's tower hidden deep inside this forest. That's probably where that elemental came from. Now that elemental acts as a hook for something they can go explore. Did you see what happened there? Populating your sandbox. You've got your 3 towns, you've got your forest. What else do you want to put in that forest? Do you want to start having some weirder things happen, like random air elementals possibly showing up, or maybe the players run into like a homunculus or something like that, something weird that you wouldn't expect to see in a forest, something other than your highwaymen, wolves, bears, mountain lions, that sort of thing? Maybe there's a wizard's tower there. Maybe there's an alchemist's guild there. Maybe there's something hidden in those woods that people didn't know about. Maybe there's a druid's coven that's out there, and you run into a raging treant that's lost its mind because this coven of druids are plague druids or something, or they're more like witches, evil witches. Figure out the normal elements of your sandbox. What's the general setting? It's forest. Okay, well, what would we run into a forest? We'd run into wild animals. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. You would run into highwaymen. Maybe there's an orc tribe living out there, or goblins. Maybe there's caves that run underneath the nearby mountain, and there's goblins that are coming out and trying to raid the town that's actually in the forest. Maybe there's a lake out there. Well, is there perhaps a small lake serpent living in that lake? Consider the different little elements, the different regional elements you have going on with your sandbox. What are things that could reasonably be in there? Figure out then what weird elements you might want to add. Random air elementals, homunculuses. Why are there slimes out here? Why is this thing out here? Why is that thing out here? Give a reason for these different elements to be there. And have them there to act as hooks for the players to explore in different ways. Now, do you have to have every little thing planned out beforehand? No. But for whatever particular portion of the sandbox your players are exploring, I would recommend to have at least 3 contingencies planned out. If in the southern portion of the forest, leaving the starting town, the players could enter the town in the middle of the forest, they could encounter the air elemental that would hint to the wizard's tower that's off to the west, or they could encounter, let's say, a band of brigands guarding the fork that heads to the northeast towards the further off town. Well, now you've got options. Why might they be heading to the middle town? Well, maybe a courier came down and said, hey, we are looking for help. We out in Woodhaven are looking for help with dealing with the raging Amanja tribe who have been desecrating the land out there and spreading a curse out in the woods. I'm stealing that from stealing those names from the 5e campaign I'm currently running in. Well, there's a hook. Your players start exploring out there. They get attacked by a random earth elemental. Well, that's weird. Why the hell is there an earth elemental out there? Well, that earth elemental, he kind of came off from the west. Maybe we go explore that way. That's a hook. Could lead to the wizard's tower. Maybe they go on to the fork in the road. They run into the brigands who are telling you, road's closed. You got to pay the toll if you want to get out to Eastwatch. That's a hook. Maybe the Eastwatch is having to deal with brigands and they're having their having their trade routes blocked. Setting up a sandbox is not setting up a game with no structure at all. A sandbox with no structure is a pile of sand that spills into a mess that gets everywhere. Set up the limits of the play area you're in. Set up 3 contingencies minimum, in my opinion. 3 contingencies that will act as hooks, potential hooks for your players to explore what they want to explore. And set up for yourself, if you really want this to feel like a sandbox, if you really want this to feel particularly like a sandbox world, a living world, plan for yourself what are things that could happen if the players decide to go here instead of here. What if the players don't go to the little village of Woodhaven that are dealing with these ravening raiders? Well, if the players decide to explore the Wizard's Tower and are spending a week there, just digging through the place, hunkering down, making it their home, perhaps when they head to Woodhaven, well, in that time, Woodhaven has now been sacked because they didn't go to deal with the Amanja. Perhaps they go to Woodhaven, they fight their way through the brigands at the fork in the road, and they go to Woodhaven and they deal with the Amanja. But now, when they try to head back, they very quickly find themselves waylaid by another group of bandits, or another portion of these bandits, these highwaymen, who now know, hey, these guys just killed our boys. Your faces are known, your names are out there. Maybe one of them got away. Or at least they know our group's gone. They've been cut up and killed. Their bodies have been looted. Well, normal soldiers aren't going to just, loot all the normal soldiers aren't going to loot all the random equipment from a bunch of bandits that they killed. They'll probably take the gold, but they're not going to take every little thing the way player characters do, the way adventurers do. Shit, the highwaymen say. We got adventurers to deal with. They killed our boys. Keep watch on the roads. If you see adventurers, get them. You got another hook, another consequence. Making a successful sandbox campaign, in my opinion, involves understanding the limits of what you can effectively run, having a plan, having multiple plans, multiple contingencies for the actions that your player characters decide to take, where they decide to go, and holding to those contingencies. Having a handful of at least simple plans set up so that you can then lead them to these different areas, like give them the option to go to these different areas and explore these different things that you've set up. And then, if you're wanting to broaden it into an overarching campaign, making sure you start small and you build out. Build out. The sandbox does not have to stay the same size. In real life, sandbox has to stay the same size until you demolish the whole thing and build it back bigger. Not true in a game. You could start small with your sandbox and comfortably build out as your players explore what you already have planned, play off their ideas too, build out from there. Take it step by step. Don't try to make everything at once. Don't try to fill everything at once. because that's what leads to burnout. That is why the huge, expansive, open world exploration style games that people think of as sandbox games almost always tend to fail. Keep the structure there, keep those walls around your sandbox, and make sure you have a plan, and make sure you know, as the players are getting along towards that plan, when to start expanding and making the box just a little bit bigger, giving them just a little bit more to explore. And that's all I have for you today, friends and gamers of all stripes. As usual, if you liked the video, please feel free to leave a like, comment down below with your ideas and suggestions. What do you think about my take on the Sandbox game? Let me know what your thoughts are down below. If you've run successful Sandbox games, I'd love to hear about what you did, what techniques you used, and how you managed to make that work. If you've been in a bad Sandbox game situation, I'd love to hear from you too. So comment down below with your thoughts. Please feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And as always, friends and gamers of all stripes, oh yeah, remember to subscribe. Follow me on my social media presences, as mentioned before. Follow my webcomic Phoenix Rising. And now, as always, friends and gamers of all stripes, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and I would like to remind you once again that in the world of tabletop gaming, you do not want to just sit back and watch, but get in there and game. Have a good one.